The rain had been falling for 3 days on the forest moon of Vera. The thick canopy above trapped the water, turning the ground into a slow-moving swamp. In that heavy silence, something waited. Its roots dug deep into the soil, and its long, vine-like arms twitched at the faintest vibration. The hunters of this world called it the Blood Petal, a carnivorous plant that did not simply trap prey, but crushed it until the bones turned to dust. The alien girl, Lyra, moved cautiously between the twisted trees. Her pale blue skin glistened under the damp light, and her breathing was quick. She had been sent to gather rare nectar for her village, but she had heard the old stories. The Blood Petal was not a myth. She could feel it now, watching her, the ground beneath her feet humming with a strange life. A faint rustle made her freeze. A vine moved ahead, blending so well with the undergrowth that she almost stepped over it. Her pulse raced as she realized the vine was slowly curling toward her boot. She backed away, but another vine slid around from behind, brushing her leg like a cold snake. The plant's trap had closed. Lyra screamed, the sound echoing through the wet forest. The vine snapped tight around her waist, lifting her off the ground. She thrashed, kicking mud into the air, but the plant dragged her toward a huge blossom. The petals were red like fresh blood, and at the center, needle-like teeth dripped with a sweet-smelling fluid. Her panic rose as the scent filled her lungs, making her dizzy. The plant's mouth opened wider, ready to pull her inside. Far away, a human named Carter was cutting through the same forest. His boots sank into the mud, but he kept moving, scanning for movement. He was a soldier stranded after a failed mission. But he had learned enough about the locals to know which dangers could kill in seconds. The moment he heard the scream, he broke into a run. His instincts told him it was no animal's cry. It was fear, raw and desperate. He burst into the clearing and saw her dangling above the blossom. The vines were like iron cables, and the plant's petals quivered as if excited. Carter didn't hesitate. He pulled the machete from his belt and charged. The first strike sliced a vine clean through, and the plant recoiled in surprise. Lyra fell slightly, but other vines tightened, fighting to keep her. Carter swung again, his arms moving with brutal speed. The plant reacted, whipping a vine toward his chest. It struck him hard, knocking him back into the mud. His breath exploded from his lungs, but he rolled to the side as another vine stabbed down like a spear. He grabbed the machete and hacked again, severing the vine that held Lyra's arm. She fell a little lower, but the blossom's teeth were now snapping just inches from her legs. Carter knew he had seconds before she was gone forever. He dived forward, catching a vine with both hands and using the blade to split it apart. The plant released a high-pitched hiss that vibrated through the ground. Lyra crashed into his arms, and he pulled her free, stumbling back into the swampy water. The plant thrashed wildly, its petals slamming shut in frustration. Carter didn't stop until they were both hidden behind a wall of thick roots. Lyra was trembling, her wide eyes locked on him. She spoke in her native tongue, words he didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. She had been seconds away from death. Carter wiped the mud from his face and checked her for wounds. The vines had left deep bruises along her waist and arms, but she was alive. He met her gaze and nodded once, a silent promise that she was safe. For now, the forest around them grew quiet again. The rain dripped from the leaves above, and the distant growl of some unseen creature rolled through the mist. Lyra clung to him, still shaking, while Carter kept scanning the shadows. The Blood Petal was not the only predator in this place. They would have to move quickly if they wanted to survive the night. Carter pushed forward through the swamp, each step sinking deeper into the mud. The alien girl held onto his arm, her breathing still uneven. She glanced over her shoulder again and again, as if expecting the Blood Petal to come crawling after them. Carter knew that wasn't how the plant hunted, but he also knew this world had its own rules. The air felt thicker here, heavy with the smell of damp earth and strange flowers. They moved past the roots of giant trees, their trunks wide enough to hide a small ship. Carter listened for the sound of rushing water. If they could find a stream, it might wash away their scent. Lyra spoke softly in her own language, pointing to a faint trail on the ground. He couldn't understand her words, but her eyes told him she wanted to take it. He nodded and let her lead the way. The path narrowed between two ridges covered in moss. Carter's instincts told him they were being watched. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he raised his machete slightly. A shadow moved in the trees above them, then disappeared. Lyra froze, gripping his arm tighter. Carter whispered for her to keep moving, his voice low and steady, but his eyes stayed locked on the canopy. They reached a small clearing where sunlight broke through the clouds. For a moment, it felt almost peaceful. Birds with bright orange wings circled above, letting out high-pitched calls. Lyra knelt and scooped water from a puddle into her hands. Carter stayed on guard, scanning the edges of the clearing. That was when he saw it, a figure crouched in the shadows, watching them. It was not human. The creature was tall and thin, with skin the color of wet stone and eyes that glowed faintly. In its hands it carried a spear made from sharpened bone. Carter's grip on the machete tightened, but the creature did not move closer. Instead, it tilted its head, studying him as if deciding whether he was a threat or prey. Lyra noticed it too, and stepped closer to Carter. The figure finally spoke in a slow, rasping voice. Carter caught only a few words in the trade language. He knew. Why here? Why bring her? It pointed the spear at Lyra, then back at the forest behind them. Carter guessed the creature was warning them about the Blood Petal's territory. He kept his weapon low, but ready. If this turned into a fight, he knew the odds were not in his favor. Lyra stepped forward and said something sharp in her own tongue. The creature's eyes narrowed. It replied quickly, and Carter could tell by her expression that the words were not kind. Before it could move closer, Carter shifted his stance, making it clear he would protect her. The tension in the air grew heavy, like the pause before a storm breaks. Without warning, the creature turned and slipped back into the trees. Carter exhaled slowly, but he didn't relax. Encounters like that rarely ended for good. He took Lyra's hand and pulled her toward the other side of the clearing. They needed to put distance between themselves and whatever territory they had just crossed into. The forest thickened again, the light fading under the dense leaves. Strange shapes moved in the fog, but they kept going, guided by the sound of flowing water ahead. When they reached the stream, Carter crouched to drink, letting the cold water wash the mud from his face. Lyra sat on a rock, her eyes scanning the shadows. She hadn't spoken in minutes, and that worried him more than the silence of the forest. A deep rumble rolled through the ground, making the water in the stream tremble. Carter looked up, every sense on alert. Lyra's eyes widened, and she grabbed his arm, pointing upstream. Something massive was moving in the fog, its outline shifting like a living mountain. Carter stood slowly, his hand tightening on the machete. Whatever it was coming their way. The fog shifted as the giant form approached. Each step sent ripples through the stream and shook the ground under their feet. Carter pulled Lyra behind a fallen log, pressing a finger to his lips. Through the haze, a massive creature emerged. It had 4 thick legs, a hunched back covered in moss, and eyes that glowed a deep green. Long tendrils hung from its jaw, swaying with each breath. The air around it smelled of damp stone and old earth. Lyra's hands trembled as she whispered something in her own language. Carter could not understand the words, but the fear in her voice was clear. The creature lowered its head to drink from the stream, its tongue lapping up water in slow, heavy motions. Carter watched its movements, noting the way its ears twitched at every sound. This was no mindless beast. It was aware, intelligent in its own way. A sudden crack of a branch echoed through the trees. The creature froze, then lifted its head. Its glowing eyes scanned the forest with slow precision. Carter's grip tightened on his machete. Lyra held, her breath pressing closer to him. The fog seemed to grow thicker, wrapping around them like a cold shroud. Carter knew if the creature detected them, running would be useless. From the shadows on the opposite bank, the same stone-skinned hunter from before appeared. It stepped into view, spear raised, its gaze fixed on the giant beast. Carter realized, too late, that the hunter was here to kill it. The hunter let out a sharp cry and hurled the spear. It struck the creature's shoulder, sinking deep into its flesh. The beast roared, the sound so powerful it rattled Carter's chest. The giant charged at the hunter, crushing the ground beneath its weight. Trees snapped like twigs as it moved. The hunter leapt aside, dodging the first strike, but the beast swung its massive head, knocking the alien off its feet. Carter knew this fight would not end well. He glanced at Lyra, then pointed toward the far bank. They needed to move while the two fought. They slipped along the edge of the stream, staying low behind rocks and roots. The beast's roars mixed with the hunter's cries of effort. A sudden splash of water nearly drenched them as the fight drew closer. Carter didn't look back. He kept pushing forward, guiding Lyra through the mud. Every step away from the battle felt like a small victory. But the beast was not only chasing the hunter, it caught their scent. A deep growl rumbled behind them, followed by heavy footsteps. Carter turned to see its massive form breaking through the fog. Eyes locked on them now. The hunter's shouts faded as the creature focused entirely on its new prey. Lyra's breath came fast and shallow as she stumbled to keep up. Carter grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a narrow ravine ahead. If they could reach it, the beast's size might keep it from following. They slid down the muddy slope, roots tearing at their clothes. The air grew colder in the shade of the ravine walls. Above them, branches shook as the beast tried to push its head into the gap. It let out another deafening roar, frustrated by the narrow space. For a moment, they thought it would leave. Then the ground beneath them shifted. Carter realized with horror that the ravine floor was not solid earth. The mud rippled, and several thick green vines shot upward, wrapping around Lyra's legs. She cried out as the vines tightened, pulling her toward the ground. Carter recognized the movement instantly. Another blood petal, larger than the first, had been waiting here. Carter dropped to his knees, hacking at the vines with his machete. The beast above growled, but could not reach them. Lyra kicked and twisted, trying to free herself, but more vines wrapped around her waist. The plant's hidden blossom opened in the mud, its red petals slick with moisture. Carter's strikes grew faster, his arms burning from the effort. He would not let the plant take her again. Carter's blade cut through the first vine, spraying a thin mist of green sap across his arms. The plant reacted instantly, pulling Lyra harder toward its open blossom. Her scream echoed off the ravine walls, making his pulse pound in his ears. He swung again, severing another vine, but 3 more wrapped around her legs. The ground shifted under his knees as more tendrils pushed up from the mud. The beast above them let out a frustrated roar. Pacing along the ravine's edge, Carter risked a glance upward. Its glowing eyes followed every movement, but the walls kept it from dropping down. That gave him a sliver of focus to deal with the real threat. He plunged the machete into the thickest vine holding Lyra's waist, twisting until the fibers split. The plant hissed, a wet, sucking sound that made his skin crawl. Lyra kicked free for a moment, but the blossom was still too close. The petals quivered, releasing a sweet cloying scent into the air. Carter felt it in his lungs, heavy and dizzying. He forced himself to keep moving, ignoring the ache in his arms. Every second mattered. If he slowed even once, the plant would pull her under the mud for good. A sudden movement in the corner of his vision caught his attention. The stone-skinned hunter had appeared again, standing at the far end of the ravine. Its eyes flicked between Carter, Lyra, and the beast above. Without a word, it hurled another spear, this time not at the beast, but at the plant. The weapon struck deep into the blossom's center, and the petals spasmed violently. The vines loosened just enough for Carter to drag Lyra away. Mud splashed around them as they stumbled toward the hunter. The beast above roared again, its head pushing further into the gap, but still unable to reach. Carter glanced back to see the plant retreating into the ground, pulling its injured blossom out of sight. The hunter motioned for them to follow quickly. They ran through the narrow path until it widened into another clearing. Carter kept his machete ready, but for now, no danger came from the trees. Lyra collapsed to her knees, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Carter crouched beside her, checking the marks on her legs and waist. The vines had left angry red welts, but no deep wounds. She met his gaze with tired eyes and whispered something he could not understand. The hunter approached slowly, keeping its distance. It spoke in the trade language again, the words rough and clipped. Carter caught enough to understand a warning. There were more plants ahead. Lyra answered sharply in her own tongue, her voice carrying both gratitude and defiance. The hunter's expression did not change, but it turned and began walking toward the far edge of the clearing. Carter hesitated. Following meant trusting someone he barely knew, but staying here was worse. The beast's roars still echoed faintly in the distance, and the Blood Petal was not a solitary threat. He helped Lyra to her feet and nodded for her to follow the hunter. They moved quickly, stepping over thick roots and pushing through walls of ferns taller than Carter himself. As they walked, Carter studied the hunter's movements. It never made a sound unless it chose to. Its steps were silent, and its eyes scanned every shadow. It carried no extra gear, only the bone spear and a small pouch at its side. Carter wondered if it lived alone in this hostile forest, or if more like it were nearby. Whatever the answer, the hunter clearly knew the safest paths. They reached a ridge that overlooked a valley shrouded in mist. The hunter stopped and pointed to a cluster of massive trees in the distance. Between their trunks, Carter could see faint shapes, huts, walkways, and flickering lights. A settlement. Lyra gasped softly, clutching Carter's arm. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and even without understanding the words, Carter knew she was telling him they had found her people. The hunter led them down the ridge, moving with the same silent precision as before. Carter kept one hand near his machete, the other steadying Lyra as they descended the steep slope. The air grew warmer in the valley, filled with the scent of DMP wood and burning herbs. The closer they came to the settlement, the more Lyra's steps quickened. Her eyes shone with recognition and hope, as though each step brought her closer to safety. When they reached the first of the giant trees, Carter could see rope bridges stretching between them. Platforms and huts were built into the trunks, high above the ground. Faint voices drifted down, speaking in Lyra's language. The hunter stopped at the base of the largest tree and let out a low, rhythmic call. Moments later, two more of its kind appeared on the platform above, lowering a rope ladder for them. Carter went first, climbing carefully with his pack slung across his back. Lyra followed close behind, her hands trembling as she gripped the rope. The hunter waited until they were both at the top before climbing itself. When they stepped onto the platform, Carter felt dozens of eyes on them. Men and women with stone-like skin stood in a semicircle, watching in silence. Some held spears. Others carried bows carved from pale wood. An older figure stepped forward, wearing a cloak made of woven leaves. Its face was marked with deep lines, and its eyes held the weight of authority. It spoke to the hunter in their language, the words sharp but calm. The hunter replied briefly, pointing to Carter and Lyra. The elder's gaze lingered on Carter, studying him with quiet intensity. Carter could not tell if the look meant distrust or curiosity, Lyra stepped forward, speaking quickly and gesturing toward Carter. She pointed to her bruised waist and legs, then mimed the snapping of vines. The gathered people murmured among themselves, their voices a mix of surprise and doubt. Carter stood still, letting her speak for him. Whatever story she was telling, it was enough to make the elder raise one hand for silence. The elder approached Carter and extended a hand, palm open. Carter hesitated, but then placed his own hand against it. The elder's grip was firm, the touch warm despite the cool air. For a brief moment, they stood like that, neither speaking. Then the elder stepped back and gestured toward one of the huts. Carter understood the meaning. They were offering shelter, at least for the night. Inside the hut, the air was warmer, lit by the glow of a small fire pit. Lyra sat on a woven mat while Carter checked the edge of his machete for damage. His muscles ached from the day's fight, but his mind stayed alert. Every creak of the platform, every shift of the wind outside, kept him on edge. He had learned too well that safety here was always temporary. A young woman entered carrying a bowl of thick stew and a skin of water. She placed them in front of Lyra, who smiled faintly in thanks. Then she handed Carter a similar bowl. The smell was rich and earthy, with hints of spice he didn't recognize. He ate slowly, his eyes still scanning the small gaps in the huts. Walls for movement outside. As the fire burned lower, Lyra spoke softly, her voice calm now. She mimed the shape of the blood petal's blossom, then crossed her hands as if in refusal. Carter understood enough, she didn't want to face another one. He nodded, but in his mind, he knew the forest was full of threats. The plant would not be the last thing trying to kill them before they could leave this place. Outside, the settlement was quiet, but Carter could hear the faint rustle of leaves far beyond the trees. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving in the dark, circling the valley. Whether it was the beast, the plants, or something worse, he couldn't tell. What he did know was that they would need to be ready when it came. The fire in the hut had burned down to glowing embers. Outside, the night was deep and heavy, the mist curling around the platforms like silent waves. Carter sat against the wall, machete across his lap. Lyra was curled on the mat beside him, finally, sleeping after the long day. He did not allow himself that comfort. His eyes stayed fixed on the small gap in the wall where he could see a sliver of the dark forest. A faint creak on the platform made his hand tighten on the handle of his weapon. He leaned forward, listening. The sound came again, slow and deliberate. Carter rose to his feet, careful not to wake Lyra. He stepped to the hut's entrance and peered into the shadows. At first he saw nothing. Then a shape emerged from the mist, one of the hunters. But its face was tense, and its weapon was already drawn. The hunter spoke quickly, pointing toward the valley beyond the trees. Even without understanding all the words, Carter recognized the urgency. Something was coming. He woke Lyra with a gentle shake. Her eyes widened when she saw the hunter and heard its tone. She reached for his arm, speaking rapidly in her own tongue, urging him to follow. Carter slung his pack over his shoulder and stepped out into the cool night air. Other hunters were gathering, their silhouettes moving between the platforms. The elder stood at the center, speaking in a voice that carried a sharp edge of command. Every set of glowing eyes turned toward the forest. Carter followed their gaze. The mist shifted, and in the distance, a faint green light glimmered. It pulsed slowly, like the heartbeat of some enormous creature. Lyra clutched his arm, whispering one word he understood: Blood Petal. The green light grew brighter, and a low hum rolled through the valley floor. The air smelled suddenly of sweet decay. Carter's pulse quickened. He remembered the scent from the ravine and from the first attack. This was not one plant. This was many. The forest below seemed to sway as if caught in a slow wind, but the trees were still. It was the vines, moving together in one massive wave. The hunters moved fast, stringing boughs and checking the edges of their spears. Carter kept Lyra close, scanning for a way down if they needed to flee. The elder barked orders, and a group of hunters vanished across a rope bridge toward the outer platforms. From somewhere in the dark, a piercing cry cut through the hum. It was answered by another and another. The sound grew into a chorus of predators, all closing in. Carter's grip on his machete tightened as the first vine lashed upward from the fog below. It was thicker than a man's arm and slick with moisture. An arrow struck it, making the vine recoil, but more followed. They coiled around the base of the nearest tree, pulling hard enough to make the platform tremble. Lyra stumbled, and Carter caught her, pulling her toward the center of the settlement. A great blossom rose through the mist, its petals unfolding in slow, deliberate motion. Behind it, another appeared, then another. The green glow lit their surfaces, revealing lines of tiny teeth glistening with nectar. The air grew heavy, the scent thick enough to make Carter's head swim. Hunters fired again and again, but the vines kept coming, wrapping around railings and snapping wooden beams. The elder shouted something sharp, and the hunters began cutting the rope bridges. Carter realized they were isolating each platform, so the plants could not reach them all at once. He helped hack through one bridge, the vines already crawling across it. When it fell, the plant below let out a sound like tearing fabric. For a moment, the assault slowed, but then the next wave came harder. Carter glanced at Lyra. Her eyes were fierce now, not just afraid. She shouted something to the elder, pointing toward the farthest tree where a single thick vine had wrapped high around the trunk. Whatever she saw in that moment made her grip his arm and pull hard. Carter didn't question it. Together, they ran toward it, the night around them filled with the roars of battle and the hiss of hungry petals. Carter followed Lyra across the shaking platform, the sound of splintering wood echoing behind them. The green glow lit the mist in all directions, making the night look alive. Vines whipped past, some striking the wooden railings hard enough to crack them. Lyra moved fast, her bare feet silent on the planks, but Carter could feel the platform tilt under their weight as the plants wrapped tighter around the trees. The farthest tree loomed ahead, its trunk wider than the others. The thick vine Lyra had pointed to earlier coiled around it like a serpent, pulsing faintly. She shouted toward a hunter who stood guard at the base of her rope ladder, and he quickly moved aside. Carter realized she had seen something the others had missed. This vine was not attacking. It was feeding something hidden higher in the tree. They climbed quickly, Carter going first to cut away smaller vines that dangled from the branches. Each one dripped a sticky fluid that clung to his hands. The higher they went, the heavier the scent became, pressing into his lungs like a weight. Lyra coughed but kept climbing. Above, a faint red glow flickered between the leaves, unlike the green light of the other plants. It made Carter grip his machete tighter. At the top, they found a large wooden platform built around the trunk. It had been abandoned, the mats and baskets left scattered as if people had fled in a hurry. In the center stood a single massive blossom, unlike any they had seen before. Its petals were black at the edges, fading to deep red toward the center, and its teeth were longer and sharper than the rest. The thick vine from below fed directly into its base. The plant stirred as they stepped closer, its petals twitching in a slow rhythm. Carter could feel the platform tremble beneath his boots. Lyra pulled a small pouch from her belt and spilled its contents into her hand. The powder shimmered faintly in the glow. She threw it toward the blossom, and where it landed, the petals sizzled and curled. The plant let out a low, rumbling hiss, and its vine tightened around the trunk. Carter didn't hesitate. He swung the machete at the thick vine, the first strike, biting deep but not cutting through. The plant lashed out with smaller tendrils, wrapping around his arms and chest. Lyra kicked at them, freeing one of his arms so he could swing again. The second blow cut halfway through the vine, releasing A burst of foul-smelling sap. The plant's hiss turned into a piercing shriek that made the wood beneath them shake. The vine began to retract, trying to pull the blossom away from the platform. Carter gritted his teeth and struck one final time. The blade cut clean through, and the vine snapped back like a broken rope, disappearing into the mist below. The blossom sagged, its petals folding inward as the glow faded from its core. Lyra let out a sharp breath, and for a moment, the forest seemed to grow quieter. They didn't have long to enjoy it. From the distance came the sound of more vines whipping through the air, and the glow of other blossoms still lit the fog. Lyra pointed toward a smaller rope bridge leading to another platform. Carter nodded, wiping the sap from his hands before grabbing her wrist and running. The bridge swayed wildly under their combined weight, but the other side was still intact. When they reached the next platform, a group of hunters met them. The elder was among them, his eyes scanning the tree they had just left. He spoke quickly to Lyra, who answered in short bursts. Carter didn't need to understand the words to know she was explaining what they had done. The elder's gaze shifted to Carter, and for the first time, he gave a short, firm nod. Below them, the hum began to fade. The plants were retreating, their green lights sinking back into the mist. Carter kept his weapon ready, but the hunters lowered theirs. The night air felt lighter now, though the sweet scent of the blood petal still clung to every breath. Lyra stepped closer to him, her expression softer, though her eyes still held the sharpness of someone who knew the danger was not gone yet. The night over the valley was slowly clearing. The mist thinned and the green glows of the blood petals had almost vanished into the forest below. Carter stood on the platform, his breath steadying after the climb and fight. Around him, hunters moved quietly, repairing ropes and checking the trees for damage. Lyra stayed close, her eyes scanning the darkness one last time before looking at him. For the first time, she did not seem afraid. The elder stepped forward, his cloak rustling in the light breeze. He carried no weapon now, only a carved staff in one hand. Speaking in the trade language, his words came slowly, as if choosing each one carefully. Carter caught enough to understand. The elder was offering thanks, not only for saving Lyra but for striking down the black-edged blossom. It was a sign to them that the forest could be fought, not only feared. Lyra spoke next, her voice soft but firm. She explained that Carter had risked his life for her twice and had done so without knowing her people or their ways. The hunters around them listened in silence, some with disbelief, others with quiet respect. When she finished, the elder raised his staff high, and the hunters let out a short, unified call that echoed across the valley like a promise. Carter nodded but stayed humble. He had not come here for praise. His mind was already on the path out of this valley, on finding a way back to whatever remained of his own people. Yet he knew leaving tonight was impossible. The forest would still be alive with movement, and the ropes between trees were fragile from the attack. For now, he would accept their shelter. By morning, the settlement felt different. Sunlight cut through the leaves, and the air was fresher without the thick scent of the blood petal. Carter walked the platforms with Lyra, watching as her people began lowering baskets to gather supplies from the forest floor. The damage was real. Several trees had been weakened, and one platform was gone entirely, but the people moved with a quiet determination to rebuild. The hunter who had first found them approached, carrying a new spear. He handed it to Carter with a short nod. The gift was simple but meaningful, a sign that he was considered an ally. Carter accepted it, feeling the balance of the weapon in his hands. Lyra smiled faintly at the exchange, as if relieved that her people now saw him as more than a stranger. Later, the elder met them again at the central platform. He spoke to Lyra for a while, and she turned to Carter to translate in broken trade speech. They wanted him to stay for some time, to help defend the valley while they strengthened their defenses. In return, They would share food, shelter, and knowledge of safe paths beyond the forest. Carter considered the offer carefully before answering. He told them he would stay for a short while, but his journey could not end here. There were still others he needed to find, and the forest was only part of the world he had to cross. Lyra's expression shifted, torn between relief and disappointment. She understood his reason, but the bond between them had been tested and made strong. It was not something either of them could forget. That night, the settlement held a small gathering. Hunters and families shared food on the central platform, fires burning in shallow pits to keep the cool air away. Lyra sat beside Carter, explaining the meaning of the songs they sang. Each was about a battle or a journey, and many told of those who had never returned. When one song ended, she rested her hand lightly on his arm, a silent sign of trust. As the firelight flickered across their faces, Carter realized that survival here was not only about strength or weapons. It was about trust, watching each other's backs, and standing together when the darkness came. The Blood Petal had taken many lives in this forest, but tonight it had lost. And as long as there were people willing to fight side by side, it would never truly win.